an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood, Season 3, Episode 2. I am not the fine man you take me for. In this episode, remember how I was like, oh, maybe Hearst has a conscience and doesn't like killing or hurting people after all. Lol. Sweet summer child. No, that is not the case. And he hurts Al, which we've never seen before on this show, and I don't care for it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks to Patrick for commissioning this episode. So, guys, there's a lot happening in this one. First of all, I want to come out of the gate and talk about Alma, as I am wont to do, because it looks like she's going to lose her baby. She's basically having an abortion because it will be so risky for her to continue with the pregnancy. And it is kind of heartbreaking because not only did she really want this baby, but she married Ellsworth because of the baby. So she is in the same position that Martha's in, weirdly, where she sacrificed her independence because of a child that is no longer a factor. And I find that absolutely depressing, to be honest. They were both very responsible. I don't think they did the wrong thing. I don't think they handled it badly or anything like that. It's just a shame that not only in this era, I was going to say in this era, but really today as well, so many women's fates are decided by whether or not they have children and or are pregnant. It's part of why I have such strong feelings about reproductive rights and education and dissemination of, free birth control and morning after pills and that kind of thing, because I have seen firsthand a couple of friends of mine get pregnant and they were not planning to. And it's the sort of thing that sure, you can, if you are absolutely responsible 100% of the time, probably avoid pregnancy. But we all make mistakes. We all take risks all the time. And pregnancies that are not wanted happen constantly. And I can think of nothing worse than a woman who does not want to have a child being forced into the situation of having to have one. And Alma's situation here, with her being at risk if she continues to carry this child, is one of those situations that falls under the heading of necessary abortion in a medical sense, that they, currently in Texas, they are trying to outlaw right now, even if a woman is at risk of death, that the abortion is going to be illegal. There's even a congressman who has been trying to bring in a bill that would give women who got abortions the death penalty. And I find it really impressive how this show deals with her having to get this procedure, and they are so matter of fact about it. She doesn't struggle and protest that, this is wrong or anything. She is very practical and understands if she doesn't do this, she's going to die. And I find it very refreshing in a way that this isn't something that is sort of treated as a very special episode, And Trixie, as awful as it is that Trixie has had to go through this procedure herself, I think she says 7 times. I really do appreciate that she is there to keep Alma company and get her, like, morale up. I was really startled at the way that she handled what was going on with Sophia. So there's a moment where, you know, things are obviously not going well. The doctor tells her that she should be doing better than she is. He tries to be, like, really vague about it at first, and she gets super frustrated, and it's just basically like, will you please fucking just tell me what you are here to say? And he finally tells her, I think that you cannot keep this pregnancy. And she is so, you can see, just deflated. Because this was something, like, the pregnancy itself was something that she had not really thought she could hope for. And she just, you know, once it happened and once he told her he thought she could get through it, she clearly, like, got her heart set on this situation. And I really feel for her. There's something about letting yourself hope for something when you know that you maybe shouldn't let yourself, but people who are better informed than you tell you that it's okay, that having hope is fine. And then you find out that they were wrong. And it's not even that they were malicious about it. It's not even that they were ignorant when they told you. They, with the best of their knowledge, were giving you the right answer. And life just doesn't work out sometimes. And there's something about an expert being wrong that can make you feel really like you haven't got any control, you know, which in truth, most of the time we don't. So she is telling Ellsworth how she wants to set up her will. And she says, I name my ward Sophia inheritor. And then says, I wish no amendment as to guardianship or administration of those properties. Which I guess, because of the way that Ellsworth reacts, because I did not remember this, but she is essentially cutting him out completely. Like, she has already established it that Seth is supposed to take guardianship of Sophia. So if Sophia is her inheritor, then she's leaving everything to Seth, if I'm not mistaken. Which I gotta say is deeply fucked up. Like, honestly, girl, what are you doing? Like, I understand that she really doesn't think she's going to make it through this. And so the consequences of this, she isn't going to have to, like, bear. But the look of betrayal on Ellsworth's face and the way that Trixie looks at him with such sympathy is heartbreaking. Ellsworth did so much to try and help this woman out in so many ways. Offering to marry her being one of the least of them, to be honest. You know, like, the way that he has managed her claim has been incredibly above board, and he is just really being thrown to the wolves here, you know? And I find it just so gross that she decided to treat him like this. And he tries so hard to be even-handed and careful about managing his reaction to this, despite the fact that this is such a slap in the face. And I cannot help but really admire that, because a lesser man would throw a fit, despite what she's going through. He, you know, and I wouldn't really blame them for throwing a fit, to be perfectly honest. The way that he keeps his temper and goes and finds Seth, and there is no confrontation to it at all. That is mad self-control. That is some shit that you just don't see every day. And it's not like he married her without the understanding of what he was getting into in terms of her previous relationship with Seth. But I think he really expected her to let it go. that the child was going to be the last vestige of whatever was between the two of them because it was unavoidable. And otherwise, they were going to move on as if this had not happened. And the fact that she is going to make a public declaration like this, leaving everything to Sophia and leaving Sophia to Seth, it feels to me like she's basically cuckolding Ellsworth in front of the entire town. Like, and I understand that maybe everybody wouldn't be privy to the information about how her holdings are distributed, but secrets like this get out. You know, this is juicy shit. That sounded really gross. But anyway, I just really was disappointed because I have admired Ellsworth a lot since the beginning of this show. And I have constantly been pleasantly surprised at the involvement that he has had in her life, because he just feels like such a side player initially. So for him to be at the point now where he's married to her and he's so like important, he just deserves more in a lot of ways in my mind. And I do think that he probably married her. I don't want to make him sound mercenary, but if I were him and I were about to marry a woman who is pregnant with another man's child, I would comfort myself with the fact that she was rich and marrying her was to my benefit as well. So to find out that she isn't planning on letting him have a benefit like that really feels like a bit of a bait and switch on top of everything else. It's not just treating him badly, but for me, it feels like breaking a business agreement. And it was an unspoken business agreement, obviously. It was not an agreement at all, apparently. But I would have taken it that way for sure. So the way that he stands up here and looks at her, and I feel so bad, and the way that Trixie looks at him too, I don't think Trixie realized that this is how Alma was going to handle this. He says, "Ought not Mr. Bullock be present to accept?" And he's like shaking. You can see his acting here is really, really good. He's trying so hard to not feel this insult for what it is. And when he says, "Shouldn't he be here to accept?" she turns and looks at him like he's out of line, which is really rich, you know. And she says, "This is our property before our marriage." And he says, "I know what it is." I mean, yeah, come on, lady. You can dress this up any way you want, but we all know what's happening here. And he says, "Doesn't he need to accept being steward now to Sophia's interests? Why don't I go fetch him?" Yeah, this moment is just rough. And I am hopeful that based on how he handles it all later, she's reconsidering the way that she decided to handle this. I'm hopeful that she writes an official will and testament out that she signs and actually changes this scenario. But anyway, guys, I cannot tell you enough how much the thought of undergoing any sort of like gynecological procedure in this era makes me want to slip my wrists. Like, I just can't think of anything worse. It's bad enough today with all of the like forward strides we've made. The scene where she is getting put under, I think it's just chloroform that they use to put her out, is really like terrifying to me. I cannot. And this is what the reality will be if we outlaw abortion. Women will be getting put out with chloroform on back tables and somebody's just going to have to go at them with some equipment in the style of the turn of the 19th century. And we just don't seem willing to admit that that's what's going to happen. So cool. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the opening of this episode, in which we get the guy who is saying the first line, which is the title of the episode. This is a weird... I'm going to read this all to you because this guy is like sort of feeling like he represents a bunch of the constituents in a way that's sort of sad. So this dude, in what's kind of portentous a moment, he climbs up on the scaffolding that they have set up for the election speeches. And this dude is wasted. And Al is laying in bed awake when the guy starts screaming. And nobody else is awake that we see. So it's just this guy yelling into the darkness. And he's saying, I am not the fine man you take me for. Climbs up. And this dude, I don't recognize. I'm not sure that it's important to any of us if we're supposed to know who this is. But he gets up there and says that he spent all of his money, that he was supposed to like do all of these like particular errands in order to invest that money into trying some of the streams, which I guess is what you do. Like you rent a parcel when you can't actually afford to buy a claim. And he says, and the flake I washed up, I drank the fuck away. I don't know as I'll get home at all. I like the way that he says that. I sold my boots. I owe $9 to a whore. And he's sort of leaning over as he says this, and then he topples right over from the scaffolding. And it's not a long drop. Normally, falling that distance, you would just be like, ow, God. But he's wasted. And the way that he falls, he lands right on his damn neck. And he lays there twitching for a second before Al, like, kind of gets up to see what the hell just happened. I really enjoy Al listening to this and being like, when the guy stops talking, sort of, it seems like that bothers him for a second. But they have to like drag his body away in the morning from in front of the scaffolding. And it's really a moment of just like, it's just very symbolic, you know, this guy who got drunk and lost everything and literally toppled off of the spot where they're supposed to be like organizing the town and politics and everything to break his neck in a very undignified fashion. And I love Johnny and Dan wandering around in their undies, basically. Dan's got his pants on with suspenders but no shirt. And Johnny's got his like onesie but no his butt flap isn't like pinned shut or buttoned shut. It was hysterical. He looks like a giant baby. And Al is irritated because it seems like Al feels like this guy being allowed to die like this and remain all night is his guy is sort of screwing up, you know? So he comes out there and looks around. And Johnny says it looks like he fell off the platform. And they're both trying to establish that this is not like a result of foul play or anybody making a particular play against somebody. It's just a pure accident, which doesn't happen that much, evidently. But yeah, Al is just irritated. Al is like just on the watch. You know, he's always paranoid, but right now he knows that they're about to come upon a moment that's going to be like determining things between him and Hearst. I don't think he's quite as aware of how bad it's going to get. I just don't think Al is used to ever needing to worry about being on the receiving end of the kind of like physical violence and threat that he deals out, because he is so frequently threatened with action against his business that action against his person feels like it's not even an option anymore. Like he's ascended past that. And it turns out he hasn't. So anyway, really quickly, we have this moment of Hearst, who is drawing this weird little map, and it's like this tiny, very spare illustration of what they figure out is actually the gem. But it's essentially meant to be a warning, if Al can figure it out, of who is coming in and what they are going to do. So, okay. I have so many questions about this. I'm gonna read this practically verbatim here, this scene, because we go to the gym, and I really enjoy the fact that Silas is just like kind of frustrated at the fact that Al keeps leaving him out of things, because he's here for the planning of this scene, but he isn't here for the execution of it, and he takes that really personally, like that was on purpose. And it may well have been on purpose. Al is very clear about how he doesn't really give a fuck or want to talk about it. But I can't help but think Silas probably is correct. Whether or not that actually matters in the end remains to be seen. I don't know if Silas is actually getting cut out of things, or if Al just didn't really need him for this. Like, he's still doing something for Al. It's not like he's being, like, you know, kept from participating at all. He's over there dealing with Saul. But, anyway, so Al asks, why the hell don't we strike first? If we know Hearst is coming, like, isn't that supposed to give us the advantage? And he's practically shaking with agitation. I feel like Dan is sort of like the audience in that we are not used to Al being vulnerable, and he doesn't like it. And it just gives him a lot of agitation. Al says, from the moment we leave the forest, Dan, it's all giving up and adjusting. Across the thoroughfare, let's see. I'm sorry, it's going too fast for me because I'm trying to read the whole thing. It's all a giving up and adjusting across the thoroughfare to slit that cocksucker's throat. And he says, we forego the rock for the dagger, learn distractions, use, and deceptions before the dagger is employed. Spirits, women, games of chance. This is one of those moments of me being like, Al, what are you even saying? I guess it's supposed to be just, we used to be able to just kill people, and now we're having to adapt. Which, sure, but like also, I know he can't. I know that the Pinkertons would be the least of his problems. But really, what would happen, though, if Al killed Hearst? What would happen? I kind of want to see. I'm not going to lie. Better than the devil you know than the one you don't, right? That's kind of what it comes down to for me with these two. It's like Hearst doesn't seem to be any less bloodthirsty than Al. And he cares about people even less. So I'd rather Al. So can't we just have Al kill Hearst and deal with the consequences later? Whatever those may be? No? But anyway. So, change calls the tune we dance to. So in calls the captain, who later on Dan calls a sea-looking fucking creature, which I think is not how I would have described the guy, but he does have a bit of a walrus vibe to him, I must say. So they're, trying to discern what this incredibly, what's the word I want, obscure note means. Of course, Dan has no idea. He's very irritated. And Al is able to put it together. He says, what if that's the door? Johnny points out the rest of it. That would make this line the bar. So then what are these X's? And Al just says murderers. And everybody sort of looks at him like, wait, what? So we have the dudes come in. And they're sitting at exactly the spots that Hearst indicated. And Dan is not behind the bar at this time. Dan is getting a shave. Because Al needs him out there where he can grab somebody. These guys each order a beer and a whiskey. And they do it in such a way that Al has to decide whom to serve first and talks about how he's worried that he's going to offend somebody. And Patrick mentioned before that this dude who's playing the guy who murdered the Cornishman last episode is the one who plays Dresden in the TV show. And I'm looking at him now and I'm like realizing that I'm not thinking that, Patrick, that you were lying to me, but I did not see it at all. And now I'm looking at him and I'm like, oh yeah, he's just so much more sunburned. And I think that one of his defining features in my mind is his lips, because he's clearly gotten surgery, like some kind of plastic surgery on his lips that give them this really distinctive, weird look. And his facial hair in this completely camouflages that. So it really covers up this aspect of his face that I find to be incredibly distinctive. So these two dudes are standing here, and there's another two who are sitting at a table behind. I am super confused about what this means. So the guy who is sitting at the bar directly by Al, not the one at the end, is the one who killed the Cornishman, whom last episode, when Hearst tells the captain to send some guys in there, I assumed that this was because he was going to try and strong arm Al. Well, giving Al the information about how these guys are going to be set up is a really weird choice. So I guess what he's doing is, I'm not telling those dudes that I'm sending them in there to kill you. I'm telling those, or that I'm sending them in there for you to kill. I'm telling them I'm sending them in there to hurt you and giving you a heads up so that you're ready and you'll be able to take care of them. And that is me doing you a favor because these guys disrespected your joint. However, the two behind at the table, Al doesn't actually do anything to. He just lets them leave. And that's the part that I find a little confusing. I'm not really sure what their deal is supposed to be. If it's just that they're not necessarily, they weren't involved in the original conflict and Al feels like killing all four of them isn't necessary. Or maybe he believes that Hearst needed a couple of witnesses to be sure that things went down the way they were supposed to. I don't know. But whatever the case, we have Johnny looking at this little chart and realizing the whole setup here. Al behaving as if this is all the most casual thing in the world. Oh, I'm getting all the drinks mixed up. Who am I supposed to hand this to? Who am I supposed to hand that to? And he goes over to give the guy his whiskey and he throws it in his face, stabs him in the heart, and then slits his throat. And it happens really fast. Meanwhile, Dan jumps up from getting a shave, allegedly, and he stabs this guy, right? It happens again so fast. I'm trying to even catch the moment when he does it, because he comes up behind the guy and grabs him around the neck, which could look for a second like he's just keeping him from shooting or letting him know. But I'm pretty sure you see him kind of jerking his arm. So the knife doesn't come through the guy's front, but he's clearly been stabbed a few times. And then Al gestures to the other guys who genuinely look like a Snidely Whiplash, wannabe. It's really something. And he tells them that they should get the hell out of here and not, just not cause any trouble. And these two dudes get up and back out. obviously taken completely by surprise. Now, I love this moment because fucking Charlie Utter walks in and sees these two bodies just dangling here and says, "I'll drink after I've et." And he starts to head out just as another dude's walking in, and he stops the guy and is like, no, you don't want to go in there. So I'm going to jump ahead to when Al meets up with Hearst. Al has a brief moment with Merrick where Merrick basically tries to insist that Al tell him exactly what's going on so he can print it in the paper. And Al just has to be like, listen, I understand that you want to know the truth, but you keep on phrasing this like you have some sort of divine right to the truth, and that's nothing. You made that up. Nobody is obligated to tell you jack shit, and I'll let you know what you need to know because it benefits me. And I'm pretty sure you know that. So can we stop doing this whole song and dance about me having to tell you something when you know I'm not gonna, and just listen to the things that I tell you and print what I say. And Merrick's obviously kind of irritated by this, but like, dude, he's right. You knew. You need to stop. Yeah, God. So, Al has to go over to Hearst, and he knows that Hearst is going to have the captain there, what he keeps calling him. And he is not allowed to bring his own second. Like, it's not even that he's not allowed, because it's not specifically said that he can't. It's more that what that would imply is something he doesn't really want to deal with. That it would look like he's coming over there needing protection. Whereas Hearst can pretend that the dude who is clearly a fucking bruiser is just a manservant meant to help with things here and there. So there's a pretense for him being there that Al can't really mimic. So Al goes over by himself. He takes a drink on the way over, and it feels like he really knows he's about to get hurt. And Dan is not happy about this situation. God bless Dan. He is so friggin' like worried about his dad. So he just clearly wants to protect him, and he can't. So we have Al going up there. There's a moment of them like ostensibly watching the speeches out on the quote veranda, which is through the hole that Hearst punched through the wall. And then they go inside and have this moment with fucking the captain. Like, he came out and held a gun to Al's back to force him to go in to talk. The captain looks over at Johnny and Dan and Silas, who are all standing on the opposite side watching, and just has the smuggest fucking smile on his face. Like, he's just so delighted that he was able to get one over, and it's so premature. Captain, I wouldn't be too smug if I were you. I know working for Hearst feels like it makes you invincible, but I wouldn't count on that. Just saying, I wouldn't count on it. So they go into the room, and essentially what Hearst says here is that I was under the impression that giving you those guys who caused trouble in your joint was going to make us even, and that you would be willing to basically roll over. Like, he doesn't, but essentially, he says, I'll not name how you would benefit from the action I wish to take, saying only instead it's my will to have you bend. I suggest you drink that. And Al looks at it and says, no. And then he says, I would incorporate into my holdings the claim now owned by Mrs. Ellsworth. I am told that you can help me bring this about. And as he says this, the captain bashes Al in the side of the head and sends him sprawling. And then they lift his hand up on the table, and Hearst pulls out a hammer. And he says to Al, "Tell me how you'll help," as he holds the hammer over his hand. And Al looks at him and says, "Well, as far as making your way into her, act averse to nasty language and partial to fruity tea." Making it very clear he has no intention of helping this fuck. And Hearst smashes him. I can't tell if he breaks one finger, multiple fingers. It's one strike and that's it. But fucking with somebody's hands, that is some shit, man. Like, that's so hard to heal. And oftentimes, even when it heals, it won't be right afterwards, you know? I just can't forgive that sort of methodology. There's something, too, about this that's, like, more brutal than Al. Even though we just saw Al stab a guy and slit his throat, Al is very final with stuff, but I don't feel like he's tortured people. I don't remember. I could be wrong, but this is basically torture, right? Like, so, yeah, Hearst is so gross. And the guy who is playing the captain, I'm not positive, but I think was in Penny Dreadful and played a real disgusting creep. So I kind of just have a vibe that I get from him that has nothing to do with him as a character. It's purely baggage from something else, I think. But Al staggers out of there holding his hand to his front, and everybody can see looking at him that he's been hurt. It's like really clearly he's got this like look on his face, and Dan says something about how that's the look he gets on his face when he's hurt. And it's this sort of like weird grimace smile that I don't think if you didn't know Al, you'd realize that that's what it was. But yeah, he has his hand like stuffed in his vest to sort of hide the fact that it's mangled, and is trying to walk straight, but staggering just a little bit because he's clearly a bit in shock. It's kind of brutal to watch. Like, we're just not used to seeing him like this. And the blood seeping through his vest as well when he puts his hand through. Like, it's just... And I love the fact that Seth gets so angry at this. Like, Seth is protective of Al in a way that I think if we'd told him he would be a year ago, he would have laughed in our faces. Like, things have just changed so much because of the particular loyalties that people feel, that we're doing things now that we would never have expected, you know? So I really enjoyed this moment with Seth being like, needing to do some deep breathing to keep himself from just rushing over to Hearst's place and bashing his face, because it's bad. That would be a bad plan. And Al tells him no and says, "Don't you go near him. I prefer I'm having mine served cold," which I'm excited to find out what that means, because the way he says it makes me feel like he has some kind of plan. So yeah, he walks away, and the dudes who are all hoping that he's okay come running up, and he says, "The first one to touch me, I kill." And he walks right on past them as they all trail behind him. At one point earlier in the episode, Silas says something about how good thing there's no water trailing or we'd be mistaken for ducklings. And that's actually like super true. And I like how it keeps coming up that they just follow behind him in a line. Also, I like the fact that Seth is really careful to not look up at Hearst exactly the way Al asked him to, because it's showing that Seth is starting to be a little bit smarter at coping with his temper. At least a little bit smarter. I'm trying to give him some credit here, but I don't want to give him too much. And I am dying to know what the fuck Al has up his sleeve in this regard. Because I have no idea, I have to be honest. I don't know what you do with somebody that's this powerful. Stage an accident, but like people are gonna know, you know, like I don't know. All right, so backing it up again, there is a moment with Martha and Seth that I just want to talk about briefly. It's not a huge deal, except it is, though. So he takes a sip of tea and tells her that he likes it stronger. And she says that she doesn't make weak tea. And he says, I shouldn't tease, and takes another sip, and she keeps staring at him. And he says, I like mine unusually strong. And she says, you could have said something that's really easy to fix. And he says, I've said it now. And she says, my goodness. And turns away with a little smile and continues to like make a new pot. And he gets this look and comes up and puts his hand on the back of her neck. And I swear to God, if I had been this woman, with that man looking at me the way he's looking at her, with his hand on the back of my neck, I would have collapsed. Like, y'all, that, there goes a moment of real, like, chemistry and sexual tension that I feel like I want to get put on a GIF and sent to men all over the world so that they can understand how to be without being creeps. Because my goodness, the way he looks at her, Lord, it's like he's seeing her for the first time. Like he's just realizing how beautiful she is. She is too, you know. I think Alma is more attractive personally, but Martha is really beautiful as well. So that's just a lucky fucker, you know. Can we just say that? So he like draws his hand down from her neck to her waist, and I really need to believe that they totally bone right here. I don't know that for a fact, but I think they do. And I also think that maybe this is the first time that they have had sex since the time before they had the fight about Alma to begin with. And later on, when Ellsworth comes by and summons him, and he has to tell her, Martha, later, that he saw Alma and that she's ill, there's a real vibe between the two of them that she is letting go what went on with Alma and knows that he is also letting it go. Like, she's not trying to be like, oh, really? You're going to go see her again? What's that about? She really seems to feel secure in letting him interact with this woman. She seems to be like, I know it's over. And even though it does make me a little uncomfortable, I trust you and I'm going to leave this alone. Which is a big deal. Like, honestly. And I think that part of her security is due to the fact that they had sex. That's my guess. But that feeling of intimacy being restored between the two of them, I feel like that's something. Because I think she knows that Seth is not somebody who is just going to like sleep with her and then go off and have an affair. Like, he's kind of a one-woman guy, even though that's a weird thing to say about a dude who was cheating on her when she showed up. They hadn't even been together yet, you know, like that wasn't the kind of relationship they have. So for me, it didn't really count then. Now it would a lot more. So in summary, regarding their relationship, I am delighted to see them moving on to this level of trust and genuine, like, what's the word? Cooperation and being partners, you know, and teasing each other the way that they do. The intimacy and humor of that little conversation just meant a lot to me. All right. So now let's talk about fucking Joni. Joni is on the edge of a complete breakdown. Like, one could have said that last episode when she put a gun to her head, but this feels worse to me than that last one. She's over here trying to help Sai, but also looking like she might collapse or burst into tears at any moment. Can I just say how great her acting is here? Because that vibe of being on the edge of a hysterical crying fit is coming through loud and clear and is totally recognizable to me. I have a hormonal imbalance that I have to take birth control to correct. And the hormonal imbalance results in pretty bad mood swings, depression, things like that. And this sort of like borderline hysteria. And I hate to use the word hysteria because that's historically been used to make women who have valid feelings seem like they're overreacting. It's been used to sort of dismiss us. But there is no other word for that feeling when it starts to come over you. When she says later to Charlie, I would tear my skin off. I have like said those exact words. You feel like you want to claw yourself. Like you're just so hyped, but there's nowhere to direct it. And you know that nobody deserves it. So you direct it at yourself because there's nowhere to put this energy and this frustration that feels like it's deserved. So you just turn it inward. And this scene with her and him, he talks about how he's reading the Bible to make him feel better. And he asks like if she believes, and she says that she tries to. But when he says, all right, he's trying, he seems to be aware that she's not doing well, but he doesn't seem to understand the depth and the breadth of it. And when she says, I had a gun to my ear at Shaughnessy's yesterday, he doesn't say, why were you doing that? He says, what the hell were you doing at Shaughnessy's? To which I'm like, sigh. Come on, dude. And then finally, what brings a gun to a temple is lack of gainful occupation and of being useful to others. I don't see you try to kill yourself here. All you do here is good for the girls and me too. And she says, I don't want to run women no more. And he says, and that's turning from your gift and your training. And she replies, when you speak, I feel like it's the devil talking. And he looks like he wants to crack her across the face as he replies, ain't that a lovely thing to hear yourself accused of? And this point, they get interrupted. So it turns out that this girl, Lila, who I think is like his particular favorite, is addicted. She's with Leon, and she is fucked up. And, of course, understandably and correctly, Joni blames Leon. And she is so disgusted with him. Meanwhile, Cy is sitting there feeling sorry for himself that he's on his sickbed but has to deal with Joni being so dramatic, essentially, is the way he says it. And Lila is collapsing and says to Joni, just let me die. And it's like she has completely taken Joni's place in a way. She's dealing with it totally differently because Joni was not an addict like this. But she's feeling absolutely trapped and used and worthless. And it is super, super sad. I can't even tell. And like later on, she stops Joni and asks her, how do you get through it? And Joni really doesn't actually have like an answer for her. It's just her sort of being like, you just do. You just kind of make yourself. And as much as I feel like that's a valid sort of truth, it's certainly not real helpful to the poor girl, you know? She seems like she's sober at the very least when Joni passes her at that point, but that certainly could be a temporary situation. Yeah, I just, and Lila, she is just so vibrant. Like, she has real presence, this actress, and it could just be because she's also very tall. She looks like she's maybe like 6 foot. But Joni comes up to her and holds her hand and just says nothing is over yet. And I know that she means this as a encouraging thing, but I feel like that's almost like worse. You know, you like want to hear that even less when you're somebody who's trying to get out of life. Someone telling you it's not over yet doesn't come across as like goodwill it comes across as like, no, you're not allowed to get off this ride. Not yet. You know, it's almost threatening. And Joni, like when she's talking to Charlie about it, I really appreciated this because Charlie is so unsure of how to cope with somebody who is going through what she is. And he has some familiarity with it because of Bill. And essentially what he tells her, because she says, Cy knew what I was. He knew to pick me all those years back. I hate being sick. Now that's interesting. What she's saying here essentially is that the fact that I am mentally ill made me a target for him, and that he knew I would be somebody it'd be easy to manipulate because of the fact that I cope with this demon all the time. And this is one of those really sticky areas for me where I think she's absolutely right, but I also feel like people will interpret sometimes saying this sort of thing as being victim blaming, and I really want it to be clear that's not what I'm doing here. But predators know exactly who to look for. They look for people who have been abandoned and are looking for someone to trust. And they look for people who are slightly unstable because it's easier to manipulate somebody whose emotions are constantly in flux, and especially somebody whose emotions are in flux and they are looking for guidance from somebody that they interpret as being an authority figure. And having been friends with a couple of people who were targeted by predators for an ongoing period of time, those predators knew precisely what they were doing, and they chose these girls precisely because of the fact that there was nobody looking out for them, and that they were, on the one hand, very naive, and on the other hand, willing to take huge risks for the approval of somebody that they cared about. And again, I don't want to say anybody who has mental issues or abandonment issues is inviting this sort of thing into their lives. I'm saying that predators are called that for a reason. They are specifically trying to find certain types of people. And the fact that she can tell that this is what was going on with Cy, I don't know if this is a step in the right direction. I don't know if she's known this the whole time. I want Joni to get out of this business, but I don't know what she could get into. And I hate Cy so deeply that I want her to kill him because I feel like he specifically is keeping her rooted to this place. And that's not really fair, except that that sort of is fair. Human nature being what it is, she keeps returning to him specifically. I don't feel like that's how it would be if he weren't here, you know? Joni I find really, really compelling, and I desperately want things to work out for her, and I'm afraid every episode that it won't, that something's going to go on, and just like, she's going to wind up dead. I won't be shocked if she either kills herself or puts herself purposely in a situation where she can get killed in order to make the process of killing herself easier. And I am dreading it, but I'm also hoping that I'm wrong. And there's a scene with Cy having this confrontation with Andy later, which that was a surprise. I sure didn't fucking expect Andy to just saunter in and be acting like, oh, will you forgive me? I know that you're basically incapacitated for life, but... And Cy acts like he is forgiving him, but you can tell, like, anybody who has watched this show and knows Cy knows, A, he sure as fuck is not going to forgive this guy, and B, he has a gun or a knife or something. So when he pulls it out from under the covers, I was like, duh. And to be honest, this is the one point in the writing that I thought was a little weak, because I feel like Andy has to know Cy well enough to be aware of what Cy is doing also. I don't know if I'm supposed to believe that Andy's like coming to Jesus moment was so significant that he has like forgotten how Cy really can be, but I don't think so. I just think that they needed him to be caught by surprise and be threatened in this way. And they get interrupted by Leon, so Cy doesn't actually get to kill him. I really believe if Leon hadn't stepped inside, Andy would be dead. I am super frustrated that Cy is still alive. I need him to be put out of his misery. I need him and Joni to move on, and Joni can only move on without him, and he has to move on by dying, because clearly he is such a fucking narcissist and is so unwilling to look at the role he has played in the misery of so many women's lives. I hate him. I hate him so much. I hate him even more than Hearst at this point still. Cy just outstrips everybody in terms of like being just a bad guy that is purely bad for me. There's nothing redeemable about this dude. I'm trying to make sure that I haven't forgotten anything else that I wanted to mention in this episode, because we have the whole thing with Merrick, and he's the one that's announcing, the speeches themselves. I did forget about that. I'm going to do this pretty quickly and there's also, two different sets of speeches. There's a speech from Calamity Jane, who talks to the kids at the schoolhouse about what went on with Custer. It was so charming. Can I just say how much I adore Jane when she's around kids? I just fucking love this scene so much. She's like really uncomfortable at first, but she clearly comes into her own and grows comfortable very quickly. You can see how like happy Martha is that she's watching this woman grow comfortable and in her element. And there's also like the really sweet moment at the end where she points at Sophia and she says, "There's another brave one. I know a brave person myself." And then she glances at Martha and says, "A couple of them." And Martha looks so moved by that. And I loved this. I love Martha because so many women would turn their nose up at somebody like Jane. And Martha is just like, obviously this woman has something to offer. Let's do this. And I love that she has that kind of open mind and eye for opportunity like that. You know, like, Martha, you're awesome. So yeah, this whole thing is so cute and sweet and I loved it. And I really have to wrap this. And then there's the actual speeches, which go exactly as I expected. Seth is pretty vague with his and does most of his speech supporting his friend Saul. EB goes up there and does nothing but talk about how Saul is a Jew and he isn't. And that's like 100% of his speech. Saul goes up and talks about some actual issues, and I think he's going to win. I have a feeling. And then the dude who's going up to talk about being sheriff after Seth, whose name I forget. I know that I checked it last time. It was like Harry or something really. But he starts talking about how he wants to be head of the fire brigade, which I don't know if that's him changing up, that he wanted to campaign for sheriff and he's decided to try something totally different, or if that's tied in with being sheriff. But they do need a fire brigade. I don't think that's a bad idea. I just don't know how many fires happen around here, but I'm sure they'll start, as the community grows. So yeah, lots of great stuff this episode, but lots of really tragic, sad stuff and upsetting stuff as well. But I really like this episode, actually. So, all right, I'm going to wrap it, but thank you all very, very much for listening. Thank you again to Patrick so much for commissioning these. I'm really excited about the movie coming down the pike soon, and that I'm going to get to watch that with all y'all. And I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.